sprung up in a silent scream and holding myself, and I couldn't stop bleeding.
That was the moment John Bobbitt realized his penis was cut off. People talked about this story around the world.
On a quiet night, June 23rd, 1993, in Manassas, Virginia, a domestic dispute escalated into one of the most shocking and sensational true crime stories of the decade. John and Lorena Bobbitt were a young couple whose seemingly ordinary marriage masked a deeply disturbing reality of abuse, trauma, and secrets waiting to be revealed. That night, everything changed, thrusting their private turmoil into the glaring spotlight of public scrutiny. As John slept, Lorena acted. In a moment of fury, she took a kitchen knife and severed his manhood, an act that would stun the world. Blood soaked the bed, and a terrified Lorena fled the apartment, organ in hand. But what drove her to commit such a shocking act? Was this an isolated moment of rage, or the culmination of years of suffering and abuse at the hands of her husband? Lorena's escape from the apartment was a frantic attempt to make sense of what she had done. She drove through the quiet streets of Manassas, her mind racing with fear, anger, and confusion. In a panicked state, she tossed the severed organ out of the car window, abandoning it in a field. Hours later, a police search would recover it, leading to a successful reattachment surgery for John, a medical miracle which only added to the bizarre and sensational nature of the case. As details of the Bobbitts' troubled marriage would emerge, the story took on a deeper, more disturbing tone. Lorena described a life of terror, one marked by constant physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. She recounted years of John's violent outbursts, infidelity, and cruelty, painting a chilling picture of a woman driven to the brink. On the night of the incident, Lorena claimed that John had raped her, a horrific culmination of a pattern of abuse which had plagued their marriage. Was Lorena a victim trapped in a never-ending cycle of violence, her actions a desperate attempt to reclaim control over her life? Or was this a crime so shocking that no amount of explanation could ever fully justify it? These questions haunted the public as the case unfolded, and the courtroom became a battleground where the truth was as elusive as ever. During Lorena's trial, the defense argued that she suffered from clinical depression and post-traumatic stress disorder due to John's relentless abuse. Expert witnesses testified that her actions were a direct result of the severe psychological trauma inflicted upon her by John's behavior. The trial became less about what Lorena did and more about why she did it, a question that would ultimately divide the nation. Was this a cry for help from a battered woman, or was there something even darker lurking beneath the surface? On the other hand, John portrayed Lorena as unhinged and vengeful, denying her claims of abuse and sexual assault. He described her as erratic and vindictive, attempting to shift the narrative and to paint himself as the victim of her outburst. But was John's defense merely a deflection? An attempt to hide his own culpability in the abuse which Lorena endured? The testimony was harrowing, and the public was left to question who was really telling the truth and how much of their story remained untold. The jury ultimately found Lorena not guilty by reason of temporary insanity, acknowledging the impact of the abuse she had suffered. Lorena's acquittal was seen as a landmark moment, sparking conversations about domestic violence, marital rape, and the often hidden suffering of abused women. But despite the verdict, the case left behind a complex legacy of pain, trauma, and unanswered questions. Could Lorena's actions be fully understood outside of the context of her abuse? And how many other women were silently enduring similar nightmares behind closed doors? The story of Lorena and John Bobbitt is not just a tale of crime. It's a haunting reminder of the darker side of romantic relationships. Their explosive and tragic saga continues to provoke debate, raise questions, and serve as a sobering exploration of the lengths to which a person can be driven when pushed to their breaking point. Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to Memento Mori Stories. I'm Ella Favela, your guide through the darker corners of human experience. If you're captivated by the mysteries of life, where coffee fuels curiosity and tales of true crime send chills down your spine, you've found your place. Whether you're a returning listener or you're just tuning in for the first time, I'm excited to have you with us. So get cozy and let's explore together. Before we embark on today's journey, I've got a little insider tip. If you thrive on stories that challenge your perception and keep you on edge, make sure to hit that subscribe button and to ring the notification bell. I release a new episode every second Friday, and I'd be honored to have you along for the ride. If you're intrigued by what happens behind the scenes of my life, make sure to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. I'm always up to something exciting, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. You'll find all of my social links conveniently displayed on screen, and they're clickable in the description box below. Also, something special for my Instagram followers. Be my 250th follower at Memento Mori Art, and you'll receive a custom painting created by yours truly, delivered straight to your door, absolutely free of charge. It's my way of saying thank you for your support and of welcoming you to our ever-growing community. Before we go any further today, we must discuss what's to come. Today's episode covers a deeply impactful and sensitive story which may very well evoke some strong emotions in my listeners. Remember, we don't just tell stories. These are real-life events that have had profound effects on individuals and communities alike. Please be advised, this channel is not intended for minors. This episode will include graphic content and in-depth discussions about domestic abuse, violence, assault, and marital non-consent. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Given the intensity of these themes, it's essential to take care of your mental and emotional well-being. We believe in the importance of openly discussing these issues to foster understanding and empathy. However, we also recognize the potential for listener distress. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, or if these topics resonate too closely with your own lived experience, it is completely fine to take a step back and to skip this episode. Your mental and emotional health is my top priority, and it's critical for you to honor your own needs and boundaries. As we explore these harrowing stories, please remember that our aim is not to sensationalize pain, rather, to honor the victims and to shed light on the realities which they endured. We wish to create a space where these difficult conversations can lead to greater awareness and ultimately to social change. By understanding the darker aspects of human behavior, we hope to contribute to the broader dialogue on prevention and support for anybody affected by such violence. If you or somebody that you know is dealing with these issues or is carrying the weight of past trauma, please know that you're not alone. There are resources and support systems available to help you. I've included a list of links and contacts in the description below, which may offer you some assistance. Whether you seek support from a professional, talk to a trusted confidant, or simply take a break from these heavy topics, there are pathways to your healing. Thank you for joining us on this journey. let's approach these stories with the compassion and respect which they deserve, and let's learn from them in ways that promote understanding and healing. And now, my friends, without further ado, it's time to grab your cup of coffee and to settle in as we dive into the tragic and highly nuanced case of Lorena Bobbitt. Before becoming a household name, Lorena Bobbitt was a young woman filled with dreams of a better life, far removed from the sensational headlines and the courtroom drama that would later define her. Born Lorena Gallo on October 31st, 1969 in Buque, Ecuador, she grew up in a modest, tight-knit family. The daughter of hardworking parents, Lorena was raised with traditional values in a culture which emphasized family, loyalty, and resilience. Even as a child, she displayed a kind and gentle nature, often described as a polite, soft-spoken, and deeply compassionate person. Her upbringing in a humble environment shaped her into a person who valued love, hard work, and the importance of supporting those around her. In her early years, Lorena's family relocated to Venezuela, where she spent most of her formative years. Life in Venezuela was simple but challenging, and her family faced financial struggles which fueled her dreams of a brighter future. Even as a young girl, Lorena was captivated by the allure of the United States, the land of opportunity, where she believed she could achieve a better life for herself and her loved ones. She fantasized about the American dream, imagining a life filled with possibilities far beyond the limitations she faced in South America. In 1987, at just 18 years old, Lorena's dreams took flight when she moved to the United States on a student visa. Arriving in Virginia, she was eager, optimistic, and determined to make the most of her new beginning. Though she spoke very little English, Lorena was undeterred, enrolling in language classes and taking on work as a manicurist and a nanny to support herself. She immersed herself in her new surroundings, quickly adapting to the fast-paced rhythm of American life, all while balancing work and school. Her friends and employers described her as a sweet-natured, hard-working, and eager-to-please young woman, traits which endeared her to those around her and painted a picture of a person determined to succeed. She was generous and kind, always willing to help others, even when she had very little for herself. Yet, beneath her cheerful demeanor, Lorena faced the often invisible struggles of an immigrant trying to find her place in a new land. She dealt with language barriers, homesickness, and the weight of trying to navigate a new culture all on her own, while sending money back to her family in Venezuela. It was during this time, amidst the pressures of building a new life, that Lorena met John Bobbitt, a charming young Marine who would sweep her off her feet. The two quickly fell in love, and the whirlwind romance offered Lorena a sense of stability and companionship that she'd been craving. They would marry in 1989, and for a brief moment, it seemed like she was living the American dream that she had always hoped for. But the picture-perfect facade would quickly begin to crack. Behind closed doors, Lorena's life was far from the fairy tale she had envisioned. Her marriage to John, which had started with so much potential, soon descended into a cycle of control, abuse, and manipulation. John's violent temper and frequent infidelities shattered her sense of safety and self-worth, leaving her trapped in a nightmare from which she saw no escape. Friends and neighbors noticed the change in her. Once lively and full of hope, she became withdrawn and fearful, hiding the bruises, both physical and emotional. The weight of her immigrant experience, combined with the relentless abuse, began to take its toll. Lorena, who had once been so full of dreams, found herself isolated, struggling not only to survive, but to keep alive the faint hope of a better future. Her journey from a hopeful young immigrant to the center of one of America's most infamous legal battles is a testament to her resilience and the hidden struggles that so many women endure behind closed doors. Who was Lorena Bobbitt before that fateful night? She was a dreamer, a survivor, and a woman trapped in circumstances far more complex and painful than the world could ever truly understand. A story that, even today, remains far more nuanced than any headline could ever suggest. Before his name became synonymous with one of the most sensationalized cases in American history, John Bobbitt was an ordinary young man with a troubled past and a complicated future. Born March 23, 1967, in Niagara Falls, New York, John Wayne Bobbitt grew up in a turbulent environment. His parents divorced when he was just 3 years old, leaving John and his siblings in a chaotic and often unstable home. Raised primarily by his father, John often found himself moving between homes of his relatives, struggling with a lack of guidance and consistent support. His early life was marked by hardship and a sense of disconnection. He bounced around different schools and struggled academically, lacking the structure and discipline that might have set him on a different path. As a teenager, John was known as a troublemaker, someone who often found himself on the wrong side of authority. He was rebellious, reckless, and prone to outbursts of anger, traits that would foreshadow the troubled relationships he would have as an adult. Despite his troubled upbringing, John was charismatic and likable, with an easygoing charm that drew people to him. He had a penchant for getting into trouble, but his good looks and confident demeanor often allowed him to talk his way out of tight spots. He was a thrill seeker who craved excitement and who often made impulsive decisions without stopping to consider the consequences. His attitude led him to join the U.S. Marines in his early 20s, a decision which would provide a brief sense of purpose and structure in his otherwise chaotic life. Serving in the Marines offered John a temporary escape from his turbulent past. He thrived in the regimented environment, finding camaraderie and a sense of belonging that he had missed during his unstable childhood. However, his time in the military was not without its challenges. John's impulsive behavior and difficulty with authority continued to cause problems, and he eventually left the service under less than ideal circumstances. By the time he was discharged, he was struggling to find a clear direction in life, hopping from one low-paying job to another with no stability. It was during this period of uncertainty that John met Lorena Gallo, a young immigrant from Venezuela who was working as a manicurist in Virginia. John was immediately drawn to Lorena's kind and gentle nature, and she was captivated by his confidence and charm. To Lorena, John seemed like the perfect embodiment of the American dream, a handsome Marine with a bright future ahead of him. The two quickly fell in love, and John's whirlwind romance with Lorena provided him with the sense of purpose and companionship he had long craved. However, beneath the surface, his darker tendencies would remain. His charming exterior masked a deep-seated anger and a pattern of abusive behavior that had begun long before he met Lorena. Friends and acquaintances often described John as controlling, manipulative, and quick to anger, traits that would later play a critical role in the unraveling of his marriage. Despite his outward charm, John's volatile temper and impulsive nature frequently put him at odds even with those closest to him. Before Lorena, John Bobbitt was a young man grappling with the unresolved trauma of his past, struggling to find his place. He was a product of his environment, a combination of charm and recklessness, resilience and volatility. As he navigated his way through life's ups and downs, John's personal demons would continue to haunt him, setting the stage for a relationship which would ultimately spiral into one of the most notorious domestic disputes in modern history.
John was a Marine veteran. In the late 1980s, he met Lorena, an immigrant from Venezuela, at a Marine Corps ball. They got married in 1989. Lorena told Steve Harvey about their relationship.
I met John, and he was nice, and he was charming, and he was kind, and things started to change after, we got married.
John and Lorena's whirlwind romance began in 1988 when their paths crossed at a small club for enlisted Marines in Quantico, Virginia. Lorena, a young immigrant from Venezuela, was working as a manicurist while striving to build herself a new life in a new country. John, a charismatic Marine, instantly caught her eye. With his clean-cut looks, confident demeanor, and uniform which symbolized the promise of stability, John embodied everything that Lorena had dreamed of since coming to America. He represented security, charm, and the allure of a life which felt worlds away from her humble beginnings. Their connection was immediate and electric. He was drawn to her sweet nature, infectious smile, and nurturing demeanor. To Lorena, John was more than just a handsome Marine. He was a protector and a provider, someone that could offer the love and stability that she desperately craved. Their attraction quickly bloomed into a passionate and intense relationship, marked by long phone calls, romantic dates, and grand promises of a future together. John showered Lorena with affection, making her feel valued and cherished in ways that she had never experienced before. John's gestures of love were sweeping and dramatic. He brought her flowers, took her out to dinner, and constantly reassured her of his commitment. For Lorena, these were the actions of a man deeply in love. To her, his attentiveness and his ability to make her feel special and seen were proof that she had finally found the love story she had always dreamed of. Within months of meeting, John proposed, and Lorena, caught up in the rush of a romance, eagerly accepted. She saw John as the embodiment of the American dream, a stable partner who could help her achieve the life that she had dreamed about since childhood. In June 1989, just 10 months after they met, John and Lorena were married in a small, intimate ceremony. She was ecstatic, filled with excitement for their future together. In the early days of their marriage, she felt like she was living in a fairy tale. They moved into a modest apartment in Manassas, Virginia, where they began to build their life together. They often spoke of their shared dreams: buying a home, starting a family, and achieving the kind of life that they had both always longed for. Despite the challenges of John transitioning from military life to civilian work, Lorena remained optimistic and supportive. She took on extra hours at the nail salon, working tirelessly to make ends meet and to contribute to their household. She was determined to create the environment she had always dreamed of, believing that their love would carry them through any hard time. She decorated their small apartment with care, turning it into a cozy home filled with reminders of their shared appreciation for the other. Though money was tight and life as a young couple is far from easy, Lorena's optimism never waned. She saw their struggles only as temporary obstacles that they could overcome together. In her eyes, John was still the loving man that she had met at that Quantico club, and she was determined to build a bright future by his side. However, beneath the surface of their romance, subtle tensions and warning signs were beginning to emerge, foreshadowing the darker days which lay ahead.
However,
beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect relationship, cracks would begin to form. At first, the red flags were subtle, small moments which Lorena chose to overlook. John's temper would flare over minor issues, but Lorena dismissed these outbursts, attributing them to stress or adjusting to married life. She was raised to believe that every couple faced challenges. She reassured herself that with enough love, patience, and understanding, they could weather any storm together. As the months passed, John's behavior grew increasingly erratic and controlling. His temper became much more volatile, and his affection was often followed by sudden bursts of anger. John began drinking heavily, staying out late, and lashing out at Lorena over the smallest mistakes, criticizing her cooking, her appearance, and her efforts to make their home a happy place. The once charismatic man that Lorena had fallen in love with was now prone to explosive rage, leaving her feeling confused, isolated, and fearful. John's charm, which had once captivated her, slowly revealed a darker, more sinister side. His mood swings were unpredictable. He could be loving and attentive one moment, then vicious and cruel the next. Lorena felt trapped in an emotional roller coaster, constantly trying to keep the peace while grappling with his ever-changing moods. Friends and neighbors began to notice the change in her. She was no longer the cheerful, optimistic young woman they once knew. Instead, she became increasingly withdrawn, her once bright demeanor overshadowed by a quiet sadness. Lorena's smile, once genuine and warm, now seemed forced, a fragile mask hiding the growing turmoil inside of their home. Despite the early warning signs, Lorena clung to the hope that things would improve. She was deeply in love with John and committed to making their marriage work. She believed in the fairy tale romance they had once shared and held on to the fleeting moments when John was kind and gentle. She convinced herself that this anger was just a phase, something they would overcome together with time. But behind closed doors, this reality was far darker and more complex. His behavior escalated from verbal abuse to physical violence, and Lorena found herself walking on eggshells, constantly trying to appease him and avoid triggering his unpredictable outbursts. As the honeymoon phase ended, the true nature of their relationship emerged: a toxic cycle of control, fear, manipulation, and apology. John's relentless criticism and aggression left Lorena feeling powerless, eroding her self-esteem and her sense of safety. She was trapped in a marriage that bore little resemblance to the dream she had envisioned, and the weight of John's abuse grew heavier with each passing day. Lorena's once unshakable hope began to waver as she realized that her love and patience alone may not be enough to change her husband's behavior. The early days of their relationship had been filled with love and promise, but beneath the surface, the seeds of a dark and tumultuous future had already been sown. The intensity of their romance quickly gave way to a nightmare that neither one of them could have foreseen, setting the stage for one of the most shocking and unforgettable events in true crime history.
What's the first thing you did when you woke up?
I cleared my thoughts and applied pressure, and I went to wake my friend up to tell him to get me to the hospital.
Describe the look on your doctor's face when you showed him what Lorena had done.
It's like his jaw dropped.
They said, we've got this guy here, his penis has been cut off, and can you come down and basically put it back on? I said, okay, do you have the penis? And they said, no.
Meanwhile, Lorena has been in the apartment with
really a knife in one hand and his penis in the other.
On the night of June 23, 1993, the quiet town of Manassas, Virginia, was thrust into the global spotlight by one of the most shocking incidents in modern history. Lorena Bobbitt, the 24-year-old manicurist, made a decision that would forever alter her life and catapult her into infamy. Behind closed doors, she was a woman pushed to the brink, navigating an increasingly abusive marriage with a man she once thought would fulfill her dreams. But on that fateful night, years of trauma, fear, and desperation culminated in a single act of violence that no one could have foreseen. According to Lorena's court testimony, that evening had begun like so many others in their tumultuous marriage, filled with tension and unspoken dread. John Bobbitt, her husband, had once again returned home late, intoxicated and belligerent. An argument quickly escalated, turning into yet another dark chapter in their increasingly volatile relationship. Lorena alleged that John had forced himself on her, a repeated violation that she said had become all too familiar. Afterward, John drifted off to sleep, oblivious to the emotional storm raging beside him. Lorena lay in the dark, consumed by the anguish of her reality, a cycle of humiliation and abuse that seemed impossible to escape. Unable to sleep, Lorena got out of bed and went to the kitchen, seeking a moment of quiet and a glass of water to steady her nerves. But as she stood there, her gaze fell on an 8-inch Ginsu carving knife resting on the counter. In a flash, years of suppressed rage, fear, and helplessness surged within her. It was a moment fueled not by premeditation, but by an overwhelming sense of desperation and pain. Lorena grabbed the knife, her mind clouded by the weight of her traumatic experiences. In a split-second decision, she returned to the bedroom, pulled back the bedsheet, and, in an act of unthinkable rage, severed John's manhood. John woke up in excruciating pain, disoriented and drenched in blood. Realizing the severity of his injury, he managed to call a friend who rushed him to the hospital. The police soon found his severed organ after an exhaustive search, packed it in ice, and delivered it to the hospital, where surgeons undertook a groundbreaking operation. The reattachment surgery, lasting over 9 hours, was a success, but the psychological scars left by the incident would remain. In the immediate aftermath of the act, Lorena fled their apartment, grappling with the reality of what she had just done. Overwhelmed by a mix of fear, adrenaline, and disbelief, she drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, still holding the severed organ. It was a moment of panic and confusion. She had acted out of desperation, feeling cornered and powerless. Eventually, she threw his manhood out of her car window, trying to rid herself of any physical evidence of her trauma. After discarding the organ, she pulled over and called 911, telling the operator in a shaken voice that she had harmed her husband. The police quickly arrived on the scene, and Lorena was taken into custody. While her actions were shocking, her arrest represented a complex intersection of mental health, domestic violence, and the consequences of surviving long-term abuse. The officers who apprehended her could see that she was distraught, but they were also acutely aware of the severity of her actions. At the police station, Lorena was processed and questioned about the events leading up to the incident. During her interrogation, she recounted her experiences with John, describing years of emotional, mental, verbal, physical, and sexual abuse. As she spoke, the officers quickly began to understand that her act of violence was not born out of simple rage, but rather was a culmination of years of suffering in an abusive relationship. Her statements revealed the torment that she had endured, painting a picture of a woman desperate to reclaim her autonomy and dignity. The legal system, however, was not equipped to fully grasp the complexities of her situation. Lorena was charged with malicious wounding, and the case quickly drew national attention. Media outlets seized the opportunity to sensationalize the story, often portraying Lorena as a villain rather than a victim of abuse. The headlines were rife with salacious details, focusing on the act itself rather than the circumstances that led to it. Lorena quickly became the subject of intense scrutiny, her image distorted in the court of public opinion. Despite the media frenzy, Lorena was initially calm in the face of her arrest. She later expressed that she felt a sense of relief, believing that she had finally escaped the cycle of abuse. As her trial approached, she became a symbol of the struggles faced by many women trapped in abusive relationships. Her story resonated loudly with countless individuals who had experienced similar situations, shining a light on the often overlooked issue of domestic violence and mental health. In her first public appearances, Lorena struggled to articulate the pain that she had endured, but her resilience began to emerge. She would later describe feeling like a, quote, caged animal throughout her marriage, caught in a cycle of fear and forced submission. As she navigated these legal proceedings, she also began to connect with advocacy groups and domestic violence organizations, beginning to find her voice in the process. As the trial approached, Lorena's situation became emblematic of a broader conversation about abuse, victimhood, and the judicial system's treatment of women. The narrative surrounding her case was polarized, with some seeing her as a victim of circumstance, while others viewing her through the lens of sensationalism and criminality. However, at the heart of it all lay a story of survival, a woman driven to the brink by years of emotional turmoil and abuse. Ultimately, her arrest marked the beginning of a long and tumultuous legal battle, which would force society to confront uncomfortable truths about domestic violence and the lengths to which victims may go when they feel they have no other option. The case would not only redefine her life, but also spark a national dialogue about the complexities of abuse and the urgent need for greater understanding and support for all victims.
The malicious wounding trial of Lorena Bobbitt began today in Manassas, Virginia. She has admitted emasculating her husband last June. Earlier today, she pleaded not guilty to the charge. This is believed to be a first step in a defense of insanity. Her attorney, Lisa Kemmler, told the jury in her opening remarks that Lorena Bobbitt was driven to the act by years of abuse.
Psychiatric disorders were the product of the years of violence and abuse that she had suffered at the hands of her husband, and that they combined to cause her to experience what Dr. Feaster will tell you was an acute psychotic break.
The trial of Lorena Bobbitt began on January 19, 1994, in Prince William County, Virginia. It quickly became one of the most sensational legal battles in American history. The courtroom was packed with journalists, curious spectators, and advocates, all eager to witness the unfolding of a case that had quickly captured national attention. The story had all of the elements of a sensational drama: love, violence, and a desperate act of defiance that would resonate with the public long after the trial concluded. At the center of this storm lay the harrowing details of Lorena's turbulent marriage to John Bobbitt, whose volatile relationship would dominate the proceedings. Ultimately, Lorena was charged with malicious wounding, and John was charged with marital, but not with. At that time in Virginia, a spouse could be charged with only if the couple was living apart or if the victim was seriously injured. As the trial progressed, Lorena's defense team, led by attorney Blair D. Howard, aimed to establish the context of the brutal reality that had driven her to her breaking point. Throughout the trial, Lorena recounted the many instances of abuse she had endured at the hands of her husband. She claimed that John had subjected her to sexual, physical, emotional, and mental abuse, flaunting his infidelities while forcing her to undergo an abortion. This narrative was not simply an isolated incident of violence. It was the culmination of years of forced suffering. Expert witnesses would corroborate her claims, detailing the escalating pattern of abuse and its profound impact on Lorena's mental health. They testified that she suffered from clinical depression and potentially post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of her experiences. This medical testimony was crucial in framing her actions not as the result of a cold-blooded decision, but rather as a desperate response to ongoing trauma. John Bobbitt, for his part, denied the allegations of abuse, insisting that he wasn't the monster his estranged wife had painted him to be. However, as he took the stand, his credibility began to falter. Under cross-examination by Howard, John's account of the events of that night wavered significantly. He provided multiple conflicting statements about their intimate life, at times claiming they hadn't had sexual relations that night, while at others suggesting that it had been consensual. These inconsistencies severely undermined his testimony, leaving the jury to question his reliability and painting him as someone not entirely forthcoming. In stark contrast, Lorena's portrayal of their marriage resonated with the jury. She spoke of John's abusive tendencies, highlighting a pervasive atmosphere of fear and control. An expert witness testified about her mental state, revealing that she lived under constant threat from John, who had reportedly told her, quote, "I will find you, whether we are divorced or separated. And wherever I find you, I will have sex with you whenever I want to." This chilling statement underscored the oppressive environment in which Lorena lived, further supporting the defense's argument that her actions were not merely a crime, but a desperate response to years of abuse and psychological torment. As the jury deliberated, they faced a complex question. Could Lorena be held accountable for her actions, given the context of her suffering? After 7 hours of intense discussion, the verdict was announced. Lorena Bobbitt was found not guilty by reason of insanity. This decision hinged on the notion of an irresistible impulse stemming from her traumatic experience. The verdict not only absolved her of criminal liability, but also forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about domestic violence and the psychological scars that it leaves upon its victims. It sparked discussions about the nuance of consent, the complexities of abuse, and the need for better support systems for victims. Following the verdict, the judge ordered Lorena to undergo a 45-day evaluation at Central State Hospital, a measure designed to assess her mental health in the aftermath of the traumatic events. The outcomes of this trial reverberated far beyond the courtroom, leading to widespread discussions about the implications of abuse, mental health, and women's rights. This case was no longer just about Lorena and John. it was a mirror reflecting the struggles so many women still face in silence. The marriage between Lorena and John would officially end in 1995, marking the conclusion of a tumultuous chapter in both of their lives. Their divorce did not signify an end to the public fascination with their story. Rather, it left behind a legacy that would spark ongoing debates about domestic violence and its consequences. The case would become a pivotal moment in the national conversation about abuse, pushing issues of gender dynamics and power imbalances into the spotlight, and serving as a reminder of the desperate lengths to which individuals may go when trapped in a cycle of violence and control. In this way, the Bobbitt case transcends sensationalism and becomes a critical moment in advocacy for women's rights and awareness of domestic violence. The Lorena Bobbitt case in the early 1990s captivated the media and the public, but it also would illustrate a troubling tendency in journalism to sensationalize issues of domestic violence rather than addressing them with the severity that they deserve. As the trial unfolded, the narrative often shifted from the complex realities of Lorena's abusive relationship with John to the shocking act of violence she committed. This shift in focus not only trivialized the severity of the issue of domestic violence, but also had potential negative repercussions for victims who sought to speak out about their own experiences. From the moment that Lorena severed John's organ, the media frenzy surrounding the case began. Headlines across the nation depicted Lorena not as a victim of domestic abuse, rather as a, quote, scorned woman who had committed a shocking crime. Tabloids and news outlets capitalized on the salacious aspects of the case, often framing her actions as sensational rather than examining the underlying causes that would drive a person to such an extreme decision. The imagery and language used in reporting often veered into the absurd, reducing a serious issue to fodder for entertainment. This portrayal would feed into a culture that dismisses the legitimacy of women's experiences in abusive relationships, framing them instead as a dramatized story rather than a complex human struggle. Television programs and talk shows seized the opportunity to showcase this trial, often hosting sensationalist discussions which lacked nuance. They focused on the grotesque and the bizarre elements of the case, prioritizing shock value and ratings over empathy or understanding. For example, talk shows invited guests to debate the morality of Lorena's decision, rather than interrogating the societal conditions which would allow such abuse to flourish. These platforms often gloss over the psychological trauma which she experienced, reducing her to a caricature of a jilted wife or a scorned Latina, rather than recognizing her as a victim seeking to escape a dangerous situation. The repercussions of this media portrayal were significant. Victims of abuse watching this coverage felt discouraged from coming forward, fearing that they would be met with ridicule or disbelief, rather than support and understanding. The Bobbitt case reinforced stereotypes about women in abusive relationships, that they are irrational or overly emotional, detracting from the reality that many victims endure prolonged trauma and manipulation. When the narrative shifts to sensationalism, it can discourage other victims from seeking help, as they fear that their stories, their truth, will be similarly trivialized. Moreover, the media's focus on Lorena's act of violence overshadowed the discussions that needed and still need to happen about the cycle of abuse and the long-lasting psychological damage it has on its victims. Instead of fostering a conversation about how to support those in abusive relationships or raising awareness about the signs of domestic violence, the coverage centered on shock and spectacle. This framing can normalize stigma surrounding abuse, making it difficult for society as a whole to engage in productive dialogue about prevention and support. The legacy of the Bobbitt case ultimately serves as a cautionary tale about the responsibilities of the media in covering sensitive topics like domestic violence. When sensationalism overshadows empathy, it risks perpetuating a culture of silence and stigma around abuse. The way Lorena's story was framed influenced public perception, reinforced harmful stereotypes, and harmed other victims who felt they no longer could safely share their experiences without facing judgment or ridicule. For survivors of domestic abuse, it is absolutely critical that the media approach such stories with care, understanding, and a commitment to highlighting the complexities of their experiences. The Bobbitt case reminds us that beneath the headlines and the sensational stories, there are real lives affected by real violence, and it is absolutely imperative to give victims the voice and dignity that they deserve. After the incident, John Bobbitt sought to capitalize on his newfound notoriety to cover his escalating medical and legal expenses. He formed a band called The Severed Parts, hoping to generate income, but the venture was ultimately unsuccessful. In September 1994, he attempted to further monetize his infamy by starring in the adult film John Wayne Bobbitt Uncut. This endeavor also did not yield significant financial returns, leading him to appear in another adult film in 1996 titled Frankenpenis. In the name... Okay, that was hard to say without laughing. In the wake of the attack and his subsequent acquittal, it came to light that John had a son named Andrew Williams, born in 1992 to Beatrice Williams from Niagara Falls, New York. Their romantic relationship ended in May 1992. John's troubles with the law would continue, as in 1994, he was charged with battery after striking Christina Elliott, a former exotic dancer he had met during a publicity tour in Las Vegas. At that time, Christina and John were engaged, but she would break off the engagement following that incident. On August 31st, 1994, John was convicted of battery and sentenced to 15 days in jail, with 75% of the original 60-day sentence being suspended. Justice of the Peace William Jansen admonished John, stating, "I firmly believe you have an attitude problem. Your attitude problem is caused by your drinking." On August 10, 1998, John would make a guest appearance on the World Wrestling Federation's Monday Night Raw is War, where he appeared alongside wrestler Val Venis. Following this brief stint in the spotlight, he relocated to Las Vegas, taking on various jobs, including bartender, limo driver, mover, pizza delivery driver, and tow truck operator. Additionally, he would serve as a minister at a local Universal Life Church wedding chapel. His legal issues would persist. In 1999, John received probation for his involvement in a theft at a store in Nevada. In 2003, he was sentenced to prison for violating his probation, following an arrest on battery charges related to his then-wife, Joanna Farrell. He faced further legal troubles, with 2 more arrests on battery charges against Farrell in 2004. That same year, he filed for divorce under the name John W. Farrell, which he had adopted during his marriage to Joanna. In 2014, John was hospitalized in an intensive care unit following a car accident in Buffalo, New York. An investigation revealed that he was not at fault. The accident had been caused by another driver running a red light. By 2024, John disclosed that he had undergone toe amputations due to toxic peripheral polyneuropathy, a condition he speculated was the result of exposure to contaminated water while he was stationed at Camp Lejeune during the 1980s. He shared that the amputations, along with complications from osteomyelitis, had rendered him unable to work, making for yet another difficult chapter in his tumultuous life. In 1993, Lorena Gallo Bobbitt became an unwilling icon in a media frenzy that overshadowed her true story of survival. After a desperate act of self-defense against years of horrific violence, her life was thrust into the spotlight, where sexism and sensationalism drowned out the real narrative. Today, Lorena stands as a powerful advocate for survivors of domestic and sexual violence, transforming her traumatic experience into a platform for change. Lorena's journey from victim to advocate has been marked by her tireless work in the Washington, D.C. area, where she has taken on the role of facilitator and supporter for other survivors. Witnessing the continued prevalence of domestic violence decades after her own ordeal, she has chosen to reclaim her narrative and to speak out. As she poignantly states, silence is not an option because silence keeps victims trapped. Survivors need support in order to escape and need to be heard in order to heal. This mantra has fueled her commitment to breaking the cycle of abuse, emphasizing the importance of courage and community in the healing process. In founding the Lorena Gallo Foundation, she now utilizes her personal experience to educate young people, first responders, and the general public on the realities of domestic violence. Her advocacy extends to various platforms, including keynote presentations at universities and workshops for organizations dedicated to gender justice. Lorena has shared her story with major media outlets like the New York Times, Vanity Fair, and Rolling Stone, providing her own unique perspective on a subject that still remains stigmatized and misunderstood. In 2019, Lorena's voice would resonate once again through the powerful docuseries Lorena, directed by Josh Rofe and produced by Jordan Peele. This was an important step in acknowledging the broader implications of her story and how it relates to societal issues. Lorena's narrative continued to unfold in 2020 with the Lifetime film I Was Lorena Bobbitt, where she served as narrator and executive producer. This fictional retelling of her life was paired with a public service announcement for the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, reinforcing her commitment to raising awareness about abuse and supporting victims. Her advocacy has had a profound impact, inspiring countless survivors to embrace their resilience and reclaim their voices. Lorena's journey is not just about surviving, it's about thriving and rebuilding a meaningful life on her own terms, challenging the narrative that others have tirelessly sought to impose upon her. Today, Lorena is available for speaking engagements, sharing her inspiring story of overcoming trauma and the importance of resilience in the face of adversity. She emphasizes that survivors are not defined by their past, but rather by their strength to continue moving forward. Through her work, Lorena continues to shed light on domestic violence, empowering others to break their silence and seek support. In a world that so often stigmatizes victims, Lorena Bobbitt's story stands as a testament to the power of survival and the never-ending need for societal change. By advocating for those who suffer in silence, she encourages a culture of openness and support, challenging the status quo. Her message is clear. Everyone has the right to be heard, and silence can never be an option in the fight against domestic violence. She also serves as a phenomenal example of the ethos of this channel, that is, By empowering victims to tell their stories, we invite society to shift into a more ethical, compassionate, and safer place for everyone. Lorena Gallo's journey from a woman entangled in one of the most sensationalized criminal cases of the 1990s to a passionate advocate for survivors of domestic violence is a testament to resilience and transformation. For many, her name is synonymous with a singular event, a desperate act of self-defense. However, her life and work extend far beyond that infamous moment. Today, Lorena stands as a powerful voice, striving to educate and empower others while challenging social norms surrounding abuse. Her commitment to educating the public, particularly young women, about the early warning signs of abusive relationships is a never-ending drive forward. She actively engages with students at colleges, sororities, and law schools, emphasizing the need for stricter laws to protect victims and to hold abusers accountable. Lorena firmly believes in the importance of background checks for gun ownership and the elimination of loopholes that allow dangerous individuals to wield weapons. Her passion for reform reflects a deep understanding of the systemic changes necessary to better protect vulnerable populations and to prevent future tragedies. In her work with local shelters in Northern Virginia, Lorena serves as a facilitator, helping survivors set boundaries and regain their autonomy. Though she doesn't have formal training as a doctor or a psychologist, she uses her unique life experience to connect with those who have faced similar struggles. Her personal journey resonated with countless victims, reminding them that they're not alone in their pain. The letters that she received during her legal battles, filled with messages of support from around the world, inspired her to dedicate her life to helping others find their voice and reclaim their power. Today, as Lorena reflects on the progress made in discussing domestic violence, she acknowledges that while conversations have increased, stigma still definitely exists. Victims often feel isolated and ashamed, reluctant to share their experiences. She highlights the strides made in awareness and resources, such as the availability of hotlines and educational materials, which do empower individuals to seek help. Nevertheless, she urges that much more work is needed to create a society where discussing domestic violence is normalized and not taboo. The Me Too movement has significantly influenced the dialogue surrounding gender-based violence, and Lorena's own story can be seen as a precursor to this modern reckoning. She recognizes the impact of her own trial in prompting legislative change aimed at protecting women, but she also stresses the ongoing need for greater vigilance and more advocacy. The media's initial portrayal of her case focused on sensationalism rather than the underlying issues of abuse, a narrative that many survivors still grapple with today. Looking back many years later, Lorena finds solace in the fact that her story has evolved from one of pain to one of empowerment. She no longer sees herself solely as a victim, but as a survivor who has transformed her trauma into a force for good. By speaking out and sharing her experience, she challenges misconceptions that still linger about domestic violence and its victims. Ultimately, Lorena Bobbitt's legacy is one of hope, resilience, and advocacy. Her unwavering commitment to supporting survivors and to educating others underscores the importance of breaking the silence surrounding domestic abuse. As she continues her work, Lorena embodies the belief that it is possible not only to survive abuse, but also to thrive in its aftermath. By shining a light on the complexities of her experience, she continues to pave the way for future generations to find their voice, to to reclaim their narrative and advocate for change in a world still grappling with the scars of domestic violence. Her name is Lorena Gallo, and this is her story. The painting I have been working on today is called Ad Astra per Aspera, To the Stars Through Difficulty. And as of the time of recording this voiceover, September 24th, 2024, at about 4:40 in the morning, I've really broken my record on just beginning next week's piece. As of right now, I have literally only completed the digital design, so I have no idea how long this one will take me, but I will pop the total number of hours on the screen right now for the curious. It is 9 by 12 inches and will be composed of some combination of watercolor and gouache paints, Posca pen, India inks, and gilding foils on 300 GSM 140-pound cold-pressed block. This piece will be available for sale, as are many of my other original works, and my books are currently open to custom commissioned work as well. I ship for free across Canada, but I'm happy to ship globally for a nominal fee as well. If any of that sounds interesting to you, please send me an email to hello@stageleftproject.ca. If you believe in the power of conversation, in dismantling the silence which shrouds domestic abuse, and in fostering empathy, then I invite you to be a part of the Memento Mori Stories community. Subscribe to our channel to stay engaged with thought-provoking stories, discussions, and creative expressions. Together, we can be a force for awareness, understanding, and healing. Your subscription is not just a click. It's a pledge to be a part of a movement which embraces the power of storytelling to bring about positive change. Remember, every voice matters, and yours can be a catalyst for good. Subscribe, share, and let's continue this journey together. Remember, one day you will die, but for now, live well. Ciao for now.